Is rugby growing or is it dying? That is the question for today's video. Had a look at World Rugby stats, yearly stats basically, to compare from 2011 through till 2018, which is the most recent stats World Rugby has on participation numbers for rugby union. I'm going to have a look at it by country, and we can see who's growing and who's struggling in the rugby world. So I'll try and do it by groups, like the Rugby Championship countries, the Pacific countries. I've not got an extensive list. For purposes of brevity, I'll try and keep it relatively tight. But it should be an interesting look. And just remember, these participation numbers, this is across the board. This is men's and women's. It's young and old. It's kids. It's President's Games, 35 and older. It's a real mixed bag. And I should say from 2014 onwards, the way World Rugby collected the stats seems to differ by total and by registered players. So it does get a little bit complicated, but still the overall story should be pretty clear. So we will start with the Rugby Championship countries, so New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, and Argentina. New Zealand is one of the few countries that doesn't separate registered and total number of players. Every player is apparently registered. And from 2011 through to 2018, it's grown by 6%. 146,000 registered, 149, 149, 148, 150, 150, 155, and 156. Now, we don't have any data. Where is this growth coming from? I would probably say it's women's players, because that seems to be the main growth area for the game here in New Zealand, but these stats are just generic ones, total numbers, so up 6%. It's not a huge number, but at least it's not on the decline. Australia, now, I don't know how they collect their numbers, but they certainly fluctuate pretty wildly. I would imagine their old numbers were registered players, and then they started collecting total, because if you just look at total, they're up 60%. Australia, where people tell us the game is dying, 297,000 in 2011, total 477 in 2018. That's a massive increase. But if you look at registered players, it's 271,000, so it's actually down 20,000 in Australia, if that 2011 number is registered players. So yeah, it's a bit of a fluctuating one. 297, 350, 480, 230, 240, 230, 270, 270. So yeah, the Aussie one is a bit of a mixed bag, but the numbers still look healthy enough, even though we often hear people say the game is dying in Australia. Those numbers are at least slightly encouraging. South Africa is another one who goes a wee bit up and down. There seems to be a bit of a surge in the more recent years, but started off at 650. 651, drops to 597, 387, huge drop, and then by the time we get to 2018, we're looking at 691, so one of the bigger numbers, and like New Zealand, it's up 6%. So I'm not sure how we explain the fluctuation in South Africa's numbers. I'm not sure if it's performances of the national team that influence how many people play rugby, but that is what that is. Argentina is another one who is trending pretty well. Starts off at 125,000. If you look at registered, it would be down because it's down to 121. But if you look at total, it's up to 161. So that's a nice 28% increase. And you'd have to say between 2011 and 2018, the Argentinian game, in terms of the support they're getting and the opportunities that there's been for Argentinian players, especially with the Juarez, has been on the improve. So all of the Rugby Championship countries are in positive numbers. The two traditional, I know football is very big in South Africa as well, but where rugby is maybe a bigger sport than most other sports, New Zealand and South Africa show the lowest in growth, whereas in Australia and Argentina, where rugby is far from a top sport, in Australia, it's behind league, it's behind Aussie rules, it's behind cricket, solid numbers. And in Argentina, I'm not sure what else there is apart from football, but I know it's definitely behind football. We'll look at Japan next. Japan's kind of over there on their own. You would like to think they're showing a bit of growth with the Rugby World Cup. They start off 2011 with 122,000, and by the time you get to 2018, they are at 295,000. That's total, Registered is 108,000. So if it's registered, you're looking at a decrease. But if you're looking at total players, 142% of the 2011 number. So very encouraging numbers. But if you like those numbers, wait till you get to Fiji. And again, I'm not sure how much of this is just how the administrators were counting players before. 2011 Fiji starts off with 37,570. Big increase to next year, 58,000. It continues, 156. Then drops to 65,000 if you're looking at registered, but the total number is the same as the previous year. So I think Fiji, you got to look at the total. By the time you get to 2018, you look at 225,000 players. 225,000 up from 37,000, 499% increase. I think that's got to be an administration thing rather than an actual growth thing, but I stand to be corrected. So, massive growth for Fiji. Samoa starts off with 22,000 and actually ends up with only 13,249. So, Samoa is one that's showing a noticeable drop. Someone closer to the scene will need to tell me what you think is the reason for this. But yeah, starts off with 22,019, then bumps up to 38. Peaks at, well, it peaked in 2011, but it has another little peak with 20,845. If you're looking at totals, there's another peak with 24,000 in 2015, World Cup year, and then from there it's kind of on the decline, 12,000, 13,000, 13,000. But maybe they just started counting registered players, I'm not sure, but they're our first one that's in the negative territory because that's minus 41%. Finally, from the Pacific, we'll look at Tonga. Explain to me how this one works. Tonga starts off with the lowest, not quite the lowest of all the teams, but among the lowest. 2011, 6,560. 6,560. So not huge numbers. However, they see it grow to 7,500, then 13. In 2014, when they start counting total players, you're looking at 48, 50, 58, 59, 60,000 players by 2018. And even if you're looking at registered players, you're looking at an increase from 6,500 to 23,000. So if you're going by total, it's an 819% increase. Are that many more Tongans really playing rugby, or is that just the way we're counting them? I'm inclined to believe it's the latter, but that's a hell of a good number in terms of reporting purposes for World Rugby, so we'll go with that. So yeah, that's New Zealand, the Rugby Championship countries, Japan, the Pacific. Mostly good news. It's just Samoa's numbers are a wee bit concerning. When we switch over to the Six Nations countries, we do get some massive numbers. England, even in 2011, had 1.9 million players. And that gets to 2 million by the time we get to 2013. However, when we split it off at 2014, when you're looking at registered and total, registered is 340,000. You're still looking at 2 million total. But that's still a heck of a lot of players. Either way you look at it. And it kind of ticks along there. I would imagine those pre-2014 numbers are definitely totals. And it's a 6% increase as well. So New Zealand, South Africa, and England just kind of trucking along. Not huge increases. Not on the decrease, which is good. I know the women's game, I think in England, is also becoming more popular. So that may account for some of that increase as well. So 6%. For France, it's a wee bit more than 6%. You start off with 360,000, which I thought is remarkably low. I would have thought they would have at least been one of the main countries on a par with England, but apparently not. They get their peak in 2016 with 634,000, and that drops down to 533,000 total with 258 registered come 2018. So 48% increase if you're counting total. If you're looking at registered, it would be a decline, but we'll go with the total because that looks better on World Rugby's books. Still a heck of a lot of players, means more than New Zealand, but definitely a much bigger country. Wales is one that, like New Zealand, doesn't differentiate between registered and total, they've got the same numbers for both, which make things a little bit easier to track. And Wales is tracking well. Starts off with 79,000, finishes off with 107,000, almost 108. So 35% increase in Wales. Very, very tidy numbers. They did have a little bit of a dip after the 2011 World Cup, but then steadily on the increase after that as well. So very nice. Scotland's numbers. Scotland are actually another one of the countries that ends up with a bit of a decline. I don't know what happened between 2011 and 2012, because you start off with 217,000 and the next year you're at 102. I have to assume this is the way they did the calculations, because it seems bizarre that they would halve their number of players. Then it kind of seems to make more sense, 104, unless I just counted it wrong when I was getting the data manually. 104, and then when you look at total, 160, 160, 180, 180. So from that initial total, 217,000 down to 2018, which finishes with 182,000, it's minus 16%. But if you take off that first one, which seems to be a bit of an anomaly in 2011, everything else seems to be tracking in the right direction for Scotland. So I'm not gonna say Scotland's numbers are declining. Makes me want to go check if I actually got that number right. Anyway, Ireland's numbers, like most of the countries, are tracking pretty well. I think better than at least those 6% countries anyway. Ireland start with 153, end up in 2018 with 209,000. If you're looking at the total, 94,000 registered, so 36% increase for Ireland. I guess it's a successful period of rugby in recent times under Joe Schmidt, so that would kind of make sense. And yeah, happy days that the game is growing. Italy, 71,000 players in 2011. 96,000 in 2018. So solid growth for the Italians as well, with 34%. If you're looking at registered, that would be growth as well, 71,000 to 77,000. But I know Italy gets a lot of stick for their performances in the Six Nations, but I still think Italy, in terms of their depth, are probably tracking in the right direction. And for Georgia, Georgia seems to be the country that everyone really gets behind in terms of wanting them to get a crack at some of the Six Nations countries. 2011, remember, Italy had 71,000, Georgia 5,500 players. Massive difference. And by 2018, Georgia's looking at 15,000. The birds outside are going nuts, by the way, and they're not in my house. 15,000 players, so 182% increase. But man, it's amazing that Georgia, I know that's 15,000 is not elite level players. This is the whole mishmash of all age groups, skill levels, and whatnot. But still, that's a pretty small number compared to most of the other countries on here. And Georgia always manages to produce a competitive team, so it's amazing. I'll do two more before I call it quits. The two North American countries. The USA has big numbers. It's a big country. Starts with 457,000. If you're looking at the totals, which I think they are, you finish with 1.4 million. Which is a 223% increase. Hopefully the game is growing in the States. They finished with 131,000 registered players, which if you think about it, is not that much different from New Zealand, even though it's a much bigger country, so it's a much smaller piece of the pie, but good numbers. And for Canada, they start with 73 and finish with 217,000 if you're looking at total. But the registered players seems to be kind of steady, 26,000 in 2014, 27,000, 27,000, 27,000, 28,000. So the registered number of players seems to be kind of steady if the game itself is growing in total. So yeah, I would say overall, these numbers are pretty positive for the game. Everywhere seems to be growing. I know the women's game, as I mentioned before, is doing particularly well. So may that continue. If you're looking at the countries in terms of the most to the least registered players, South Africa's first, England second, Australia, France, New Zealand, USA. You can see the list. Georgia's down the bottom with only 9,000 registered players. So New Zealand, in terms of our size, I think that's a pretty hefty chunk. Again, we do seem to register all our players. And then when you switch though to total players, England way shoots to the top with 2 million. USA also shoots up to number 2 with 1.4. South Africa's number, their registered and total number is not that much different, but they're still in there with 3rd. New Zealand drops down to like 12th. Wales is 13th. Georgia and Samoa down there, both of the lists. Not huge in terms of number of players, but again, when you look at their performances on the international stage, you got to wonder how they get as good as they get, given of this number, it's only a very small section that would be elite level players, you know what I mean? But yeah, that is what it is. So yeah, overall, I might have to do another video based on some of the other countries. Like, it'd be interesting to see how Russia's doing, Uruguay, you know, all other kinds of Brazil growing the game countries. China would be an interesting one to look at. But yeah, you guys let me know what you reckon. It's one I'm a bit torn on, because sometimes when I go to club rugby, I went recently, it was pretty sparsely attended here in New Zealand. To see that the game is kind of holding steady or maybe even slightly growing doesn't always ring that true. Super Rugby attendances had been down, but I don't know. You guys let me know what you reckon. These are World Rugby's numbers, so take that with what it is. And yeah, I'll talk to you guys again soon. See you later. Also, big thank you to Vahith for editing this video for me. Really much appreciated. Vahith also supports me on Patreon as well, so very, very much appreciated. Top man. And yeah, he's got a friend who runs a channel called Total Tactics Football. So if you guys are interested in your soccer football, I would recommend. It's a relatively new channel. Go check it out. They've got match previews, match analysis, transfer stuff, you know, Champions League, all the big soccer football matches. If you're interested in that, check that channel out. I will put the link in the description. All right, guys, cheers, and I'll talk to you again soon. See you later.